Yesterday, we got the news during our show. I heard the morning today talking about it. The release of Darius Slay. And there was some reporting out there, D-Gun, saying maybe he could come back. I don't think he's going to come back, but whatever is going to happen. The Eagles released Darius Slay yesterday. And it did bring me back here to last week because at the Combine, Howie Roseman basically told us this was going to happen. He said to be patient. He said it might be a different kind of Eagles offseason, and it doesn't end, or even really, there's a lot of it, right? It's not just March. It could be they could acquire players in April, the draft in May and June. We've seen Howie before. But there does seem to be a sense out there that they might have a quiet offseason, that they might lose a lot of these guys. Slay was the first one. Next week, Zach Bond's going to be a free agent. I saw something yesterday that his market could be $16 to $21 million per year. I'm not sure if the Eagles are going to pay that. They could lose Milton Williams. They could lose Josh Sweat. They could lose a lot of these guys. And I feel like some people might be okay with that. And I recognize some of this is reality, right? You have a championship and then people approach your players and you can only pay so many guys. I understand that. And I don't expect them to re-sign everyone or get every big name. But, Hugh, I'm not okay with the idea of a quiet offseason. They're trying to defend a championship. And however Howie's got to do it, I need the team next year to be as talented, if not more, but at least as talented as it was last year. So I'm not okay with this idea of a quiet offseason. It started yesterday with Darius Slay. A lot of reports out there they might lose some big free agents here. Hugh Douglas, are you okay coming off a Super Bowl with a quiet offseason by the Eagles?
You know what's funny? This is starting to become a little bit of a trend, and I think it's necessary because I feel like the more I try to teach people, the more they understand.
It's going to be one of those days.
No, I'm just saying, and that's how the algorithm or the poll goes my way because I do a great job of explaining things to people. So here we go. About to long talk a little bit, Kyle. Am I okay with the quiet offseason? Yes, I am, because here's the thing. You know, we talk about Howie season and how we trust and all this stuff. We bleed for the city and all this other stuff. So Howie told me last week that this was probably going to be a slow off season. He said, be patient. We're going to make moves. So with that being said, I can't trust Howie on one hand and not trust him on another. And what I mean by that is this. Howie's brought us 2 Super Bowls, correct?
He has.
Howie's done it his way. And he made an analogy the other day that I totally agree with. You know, like winning Super Bowl. I guess I'm a virgin when it comes to that because I never won one, but, you know, he equated it to sex and all the other good stuff, which I thought was a great analogy, but that's neither here nor there. But the point is this. Howie told us that he's trying to build a winner. It's going to look a little different, so be patient. So I owe it to Howie, the 2 Super Bowl champion, bringing to the city guy that he is, the guy that got busted upside the head with a can of beer and said that he bleeds for this city. I owe it to him to be patient because he has brought us something that we have never experienced before. So, yes, I'm going to be patient.
So, all right, I agree with the point on how he deserves the benefit of the doubt in most of these things. But we always point out the full resume of Howie, and it's a great resume, right? It's one I think is going to end up in the Hall of Fame one day. Howie Roseman will be there. But is it fair to point out that the 2 years after he's been to Super Bowls, right? They went to the 2017 Super Bowl, 2018, February 2018. The next year, Hugh, they were 500 in the beginning of December and had a rally and barely made the playoffs in 2018. And if Foles doesn't come in, I don't even think they make the playoffs the year after they won the Super Bowl in 2017. And then 2 years ago, they come back and they collapse in the month of December and into January. So Howie's done a lot of great things. But you know what? One thing he hasn't done yet? He hasn't figured out how to back up the Super Bowl the next year.
Because it's hard to do, Joe.
I know it is. I recognize that.
And the reason, can I just give you a little insight on why I feel like we're in a good spot? Because when you talk about the core of our squad, it's intact. And that's the allocation of all the resources on the offensive side of the ball. Now, people are looking at this Myles Garrett thing. They're looking at the fact that when we look at this team, we're going to lose a bunch of defensive players. But the one thing that I feel that the Eagles have that some other teams have, but they have an abundance of, is damn good coaches. Now, the reason why I feel that way is because for 2 reasons. I have, in a small sampling size, I have varying examples of good coaching and bad coaching with the same people that are involved. And if you want to call it a control group, in this control group, I have the same people that are in this control group: Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, the young guys. Mm-hmm. And you look at that year that Coach Desai was the defensive coach. These guys did not live up to their potential. Vic Fangio's been here for a year, and I can tell you something that I know for a fact, Joe, because I played defense. Some people might not believe that, but it's the truth.
Really?
Yeah.
You sure?
It's for them to pick up that defense, the way that they picked it up and excel in it in such a short period of time, that doesn't happen that often in the NFL. I feel like with this coaching staff and the way that they coach and the pieces, the new pieces that they're going to integrate into this defense, that they're going to be okay.
So I think they're going to be okay, too, but I want to be great again. And a quiet offseason, does that equal greatness? And look, yesterday started with Slay. We got the news this morning, though I don't think this one's a needle movie. They're also releasing James Bradbury. That one's more probably just, yeah, I know, I get it. That's procedural. But Elliot last week, when we asked him on our show, could we see another big name, or what's the surprise we could see? He threw this name at us that we should watch for as a potential cut in the next week or so.
I think Goddard is a name you have to keep an eye on. He has no more guaranteed money left in his contract. If he hits free agency, he would be one of the top free agents available. And I think over the next week or two, you'll see a resolution there, whether it's an extension, and I wouldn't completely rule that out, or it's Goddard is traded or, potentially released. I don't think he'll be released, but that's a potential option if other teams out there don't think the Eagles are just going to cut him anyway. I just think with his contract and how they're paying everybody else, like, Goddard is a name I would keep an eye on for Eagles fans.
Well, my eye is on it now. 215-592-9494. Would you be okay with a quiet Eagles offseason off a Super Bowl? I just wrote down quickly 8 names. And right now, I don't know if any of these guys are going to be back. Maybe 2 of them will be back. Maybe 3. Maybe 1. I mean, maybe none. Here are the 8 names. And when I say these to you, think about the 2024 Eagles without these 8 guys. Like, I know there's turnover every year in the NFL. But these guys played a big role. BG, Goddard, Milton Williams, Darius Slay, Zach Bond, Mekhi Becton, Josh Sweat, Kenny Gainwell. They all could be gone. And if the Eagles don't go out there and replace them, adequately, that's a quiet offseason to me. 215-592-9494. Slay is gone. I'm not surprised. They were preparing for this with 2 young corners last year in the draft. But now we await the next moves. And it does feel like between yesterday, Howie's comments at the Combine, feels like they're greasing the skids here for what we would call a quiet offseason. And I'm not okay with this. Hugh's okay with it. Kyle, how you feeling this morning, day after the release of Slay, and now we await the next moves from the Eagles?
Yeah, I mean, of course I'm not okay with the quiet offseason. You can just look at the history of the Eagles, and loud offseasons usually end up equaling loud seasons. Like, they go to the Super Bowl, they win Super Bowls. Like, this is what happens when we go out and make big moves in free agency. The A.J. Brown thing, Saquon Barkley, even T.O. in 2004, Alshon before 2017. Yep. Now, not a star, but, a big move to get your quarterback and number 1 receiver. These are moves that propelled us to go to the Super Bowl the next year and in some cases win it. Now, I guess the year that I'm thinking of in terms of a quiet offseason was after 2022 when they just lost a lot of guys, didn't really make a huge move in free agency that year.
Hargrave, TJ Edwards, they all walked.
And we saw what happened at the end of the year. So, no, I'm not okay with it. Like, anybody who wants to repeat next season should not just be okay with the Eagles sitting around and having a quiet offseason and being complacent. And you know who I want to get here. I want to get Myles Garrett. That's like the loudest move you could possibly make. So I'm all in on doing whatever it takes to get this Eagles team back to the Super Bowl and winning it again next season.
Yeah, so that's really it. If the goal is to win the Super Bowl again, Hugh, are they going to be a good team next year, almost regardless of how they approach this offseason? Probably, right? You mentioned it, Hugh. They have the core, right? They have most of their offensive guys coming back. They have Jalen Carter coming back. They have Quinyon. They have Cooper. But if the goal is to win the Super Bowl next year, not just to be adequate or decent, quiet doesn't usually lead to that, Hugh. Usually you need to have a little more spice to this. And as we get towards, a week from now, legal tampering will have begun. I believe legal tampering starts on Monday of next week, and then the league year opens on Wednesday, and we'll be at McGurk's and Roars for next week for that. Hugh, if we get to McGurk's next Wednesday and they've lost Bond, and they've lost Milton, and they've lost Sweat, and they've lost Slay, and they released Goddard, that feels too quiet to me. Feels very quiet.
Let me try to help y'all out a little bit. Going into this season, knowing what we knew about this defense and the personnel that we got in, what was the What was the most that we aspired for?
Middle of the pack.
Middle of the pack defense. So with that being said, with that middle of the pack defense, I think it's safe to say that most people felt that, we're a playoff contender, but not really a strong contender for the Super Bowl, correct?
I think a lot of people thought that they were probably what you just said, yeah.
Yeah. So with good coaching and putting people in position to be successful with the personnel that we had, we overachieved. Would you agree with that?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I'll just say it from my perspective. They were better than I thought they'd be.
Yeah.
Sure.
I feel like a lot of that had to do with coaching, especially when you talk about, a guy like Zach Bond, you talk about Jalen Carter and Coach No Neck. Coach Hurt that got him in position and basically told those guys, you're better than what you've been showing, So I feel like the one edge that the Eagles have that a lot of teams don't have is a good developmental program. And that's why I feel like they're in a good spot. Shout out to Connor Barwin, man. That's a guy who, when you talk about this Eagles organization and this team, that doesn't get a lot of respect. I think the Eagles have invested in something that a lot of teams kind of overlook because coming into the NFL, a lot of teams feel like, they're under a lot of pressure. They don't have time to coach guys. They just got to get them on the field, and the pressure is to be successful in a short period of time. What the Eagles have done is they've put together an infrastructure that helps groom these young players and develop them and make them better. Perfect example of that is Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith was skewing bust for a lot of people. They worked with him, and he became one of the premier players, especially in the playoffs. I believe that this team and this organization has the right infrastructure in place that you could lose 6 to 7 guys off the defensive side of the ball.
It's a lot.
And still be an effective, productive team because the scheme that they're running and the guys that they have are plug-and-play guys, and it's not that hard to learn.
So I agree with some of what you said there, and I think long-term it's going to work out just fine for the Eagles. I also think we may have underrated their talent to start the season, their depth to start the season. Like, yeah, Nolan Smith was a question mark, but he was a first-round pick.
Yeah.
Josh Sweat off the year he had before was a question mark, but Josh Sweat had been a double-digit sack guy in the NFL before and then showed he could be a lead rusher again on a good team. And Zach Bond was better than anyone realized. Was that just coaching, or were they good players? Like, if we lose all those guys, maybe we replace them with guys that aren't quite as good.
I think there was some coaching. I think coaching had a lot to do with the envision. And, not taking anything away from Zach. I think there are some smart guys. They have a good group of smart young men that understand, from almost day one, where everybody fits in this defense.
Yeah, I understand that. I just think if it's a quiet offseason, the most likely scenario next year is a step back. Yeah. And again, I don't mean they're going to win 6 games, but they were the best team in the NFL from the end of September through the beginning of February.
Mm-hmm. Right.
If they have a quiet offseason, do we expect that next year?
Yeah, you said we can lose these guys and still be effective and productive. Like, that to me says, like, what? Like, 10 wins, 11 wins, effective, productive. Like, I want to be great. I want to be the best team again. And while the Eagles had a lot of young talent step up last year, they did try to sign Bryce Huff last offseason, which would have been a big move. Granted, didn't work out. Yep. And then Saquon Barkley on the other side. The Eagles had a loud offseason last year. It just only they hit one. They were 1-1 in those 2 players, but it got them to the Super Bowl. The Saquon thing got them to the Super Bowl.
Well, yeah, and then Zach Bond wasn't a loud signing, but he had a loud impact when he was 5th in Defensive Player of the Year. 215-592-9494. It feels like we could be heading for a quiet Eagles offseason. Started yesterday with the release of Darius Slay. Are you okay with that? Coming off a Super Bowl, would you be okay with a quiet Eagles offseason? We've had these. We've done these Birdstown Hall on the first day of free agency. I can think back like 7 or 8 years now, and there's been a handful of them that have been loud, like the Saquon signing. They've had years where they did a lot of big things. And then there's been some where we basically were reacting to them losing players the whole day. And to Kyle's point, and I think Spike mentioned this a couple weeks ago on their show, usually the years they're louder and they acquire the bigger names is the years they're better. And the years they lose guys, the years they're not as good.